Okay. Before, in the beginning, I would like to ask all of you, what does this logo make you think of? Please feel free to share your answers.
Come on, people, give your suggestions. This is a good time to interact with each other. Plus, when you look at it, the first thing I see is a brain, and then I'm remembered of Hannibal Lecter, so that's not a good thing. So what do you guys think?
Well, I probably think the first thing came up to my mind it looks like a microphone to me, to be honest, the way that it looks pretty much like a bow, and the brand represents the mic itself. As we as a psychology club, we can share these ideas with our mics.
Well, yeah. Other than that, many suggested that it's a trophy, so I'm not shocked about it. So I'm honored as a design team leader to welcome you all on behalf of my colleagues or team members of Psych Society Club. After the great efforts in our Psych Society Club, the new logo, I would like to mention this quote to you guys. Design creates culture, and culture shapes values, and values determine the future. So styles come and go. Good design is a language, not a style. So when we are studying psychology, we quickly discover that the universal symbol of discipline is a pitchfork shaped image like in the ones in the picture above. Now, while this is great for shorthand purposes, like drawing the symbol rather than having to spell out the word psychology in full. So have you ever wondered about where the psychology symbol originates? So our message behind this logo, next please. Our message behind this logo is to discover the origin of the psychology symbol. You simply have to trace the etymology. What we mean by etymology is word origin and sense development. The symbol of psychology represents the letter of the Greek alphabet, psi, so which is also the first letter of the Greek word psych, meaning mind or soul, from which the team psych arose, which in turn gave us the name of the discipline psychology, which is the most commonly defined as study of the mind. Next, please. So at the right, you will find our new logo. And at the left, it's our old Psych Society Club's logo. The selection of typefaces and how they are arranged is as important as the use of color, images, graphics in creating a logo. Why? Because people associate the way the word looks like and with what the word actually says to determine how they feel. Strong logo design provocates emotional connection. We want our typography to strike interest, promote trust, and encourage optimism. Typography is a way to stir up such a feeling without people even being actively aware of it. So yeah, we were designing and we took plenty of time to come up with this design. We are glad to came with this creative logo. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope it's clear now.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Alhanouf, our president. And you know, there's this quote I read by Mark Twain, I guess. I'm not entirely sure, which said, books are a good way to know that every great new idea you had has been thought by someone else. And just, you know, when you read new stuff and you learn new stuff, you get your own ideas that you want to do this or that. and you just realize, oh, someone actually thought about it. I thought I was original. So that's what everything is. That's what, you know, this club is about. So do join in, give your suggestion, give your, you know, your view on it. Be a part of it. It's much better when you're more connected and more interactive. Right now, we'll be moving on to a word from our advisor, Dr. Ijha, the one who was talking before. And go ahead, Dr. Ijha.
Okay, just one hello?
Yes, Mr. Mohammed, Dr. Mohammed, sorry.
Just want to clarify one idea. Can you put your silence? Okay, you watch psyche, which means soul, Greek. Okay, and this idea, when I dig in the history of this the concept, it was used 10 BC before the Greek. What we call psycho. Psycho means soul, mental illness, and other form of not biological, not body, something out, like what you say, soul, spirit, and so on. And the system was developed in what we call now you know, in the what we call Black Athena. You know, this work, it was developed by Martin Bernal, in which he go to the etymology again of the concept and arrive to the conclusion. That's mean this concept what you used before the Greek. The Greek at that time, they go all, you know, they visited many places like Libya, what we call now Libya, Sudan, Ethiopia, Egypt, and you're collecting information about the wisdom of this old culture. Now the Greek take that psycho and turn it to psyche. See the sound, psycho means soul, mental system, and so on. Psyche is the Greek, borrowed from the Greek. But as you know, what we call the Eurocentrism, they went to start civilization from the Greek. But before the Greek, there is giant civilizations was ignored by, you know, the history of the European Eurocentric knowledge, sciences, and they bring it to Athena. That's what, if you have time, I will give the book to Alhanouf, 3 volumes, and you dig inside this because very interesting. What you call the Black Athena by Martin Bernal, and it was black everywhere around the academia, around the world, because they question many assumptions. This, if you go back, there's contribution of the Arabs, of the African, of the Asian. Why you all of them go back to Athena from the Greek, particularly from the 6th BC to 5th BC to 4th BC and so on. And the humanity start knowledge only when the Greek start their civilization, which are wrong. And that, I think, it's very interesting to be aware about this. I think this is one. 2, there is many contribution of the Arabo-Islamic civilization, particularly between the 7th and the 16th century, what we call the golden age of production of science. All this knowledge from my digging in the history of psychology until 1920, 2/3 of the textbook published in the West, they have the names of this Arabo-Islamic psychologist, philosopher, and so on. As you know, before we don't say everything is philosophy, integrated within philosophy. The work of Avicenna, Ibn Sina, the work of Ibn Rushd, the work of Razi, they tackle these issues. And if you dig inside the history of this, you can discover it. And now we are coming back to many theories in psychology specialized in this era. I'm talking about the 7th century and the 16th century.
That is actually a good point, Doctor. Thank you for your contribution. I'm glad you're here, because that's actually a good point to make, that the history is written by who went. So it's really been whitewashed, that only everything came from Europe. It's true, but it's not true in a sense that everything was developed and is still being developed till now by other people. And we'll just add from what was given to us by the previous generation. And now going back to our advisor, thank you for your contribution, Dr. Mohammed. Going back to our advisor, Dr. Ijha, and a word from our advisor, please.
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you, William. Thank you, Hanouf. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for the contribution. Just I need to emphasize on the importance of the students in making this great event, in my opinion. This is not the first or the second time that we are running this kind of event. Before 2 years back, this event has taken place at the university, and a very wonderful talks has been held related to issues that are an area of interest and need to so many students, like talking about stress and anxiety and personality disorders. Dr. Mohammed Elhammoumi was with us, Dr.Lina, Dr. Ahmed Al-Najjar, so many of the colleagues has participated in that event. This means that the students at the United Arab Emirates University and the Psychology Club are doing a great job, and I am seeing leadership skills in what you are really doing. Myself, I am very proud of what you are doing, and I consider this event as a successful event. Mental health is something really important, and it's an area of importance, and that the logo is really reflecting clearly, and I loved your logo because it talks about the balance between the left and the right side of the brain. And we all know that the left brain is responsible for logical thinking and for problem solving and for critical thinking, which is an area of analysis and the reasoning. And my message to you during this day is that, guys, everything in our life should be really very well analyzed based on scientific resources, based on reasoning and effects. The time we develop this skill in our mindset, by default, we will develop the skill of the right side of the brain, which is the brain responsible for creativity and for problem solving. Putting those two hemispheres, the left and the right side, together is, for me, or it will take you to an effective way of thinking, which is requested in the 21st century skills. And this is what we really want from you. The time we develop our mindset, the time we will be able to overcome so many problems and thinking barriers, like psychological perhaps problems, cognitive barriers, social barriers. I'm sure we all are facing now, or we have faced during the last year and the year before, the problem of or the pandemic disease, which is the corona, and how it affected so many areas in our lives and caused a lot of stress between our families, health issues, and so on, economically as well. But having a strong mindset and a positive mindset will make us able to overcome so many problems and to challenge so many issues. Being mentally healthy, that means that you are psychologically speaking healthy, that you are health-wise speaking, you are healthy and able to deal with the ups and downs of life. And yes, life is about challenges. And this is my message to you, that we are born to be challengers. We are born to be leaders. We are born to look out of the box. And what is impossible could be in the near future possible. This depends on how you think. And this is my message to you. Again, thank you so much indeed for the efforts that has been done by your side. And I wish you all the success in this event. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Ijha. I'm so glad for your words. They were really nice. And we're going to go straight to our panel discussion with our doctors, and our mediator is going to be Abdalla Alameri, and he's going to present our doctors to you. So to our panel discussion, please.
Thank you so much, William. So hello, everybody. First, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Abdalla Alameri. I'm a psychology student at UAEU. And recently I have joined the club with the guys. So actually this is my first time to be a participant in such an event. So excuse me if I wasn't perfectly doing my job, okay? So first I would like to introduce our doctors after I introduce myself. Today we have 4 main doctors that will be joining our panel discussion. First, we've got Dr. Anton. Dr. Anton. Okay. Is Dr. Anton here or not? Okay, so we've got Dr. Anton. Dr. Anton, he's a graduate PhD from New York University School of Law. And we've got Dr. Ian Gray. He holds a PhD from National University of Ireland. And we've got Dr. Taregh Shabban. Okay, we've got Dr. Taregh Shabban. He's a graduate from University of London as a psychoanalytic studies. And Dr. Mohammed Elhammoumi, a doctorate degree doctor of philosophy in experimental social psychology and sociology at University of Paris. Okay. After we introduced the doctors, so for this panel discussion, we would like to know more about the doctors' profession and their journey. We want to know how did their journey went, and they can share their experience, and they can share some misconceptions, some awareness, and some tips for students who want to study psychology or who already studied psychology and they want to know what's their next steps after the bachelor degree, and so what they can do. Okay, so starting off, so for the doctors, please feel free to answer the questions. So I'll be going through a couple of questions, and please feel free if you want to like answer like any questions. Okay. Can you like tell us? So starting off, let's start with the Dr. Taregh Shabban. Doctor, can you tell us about your first year? How did it go, and what made you choose studying psychology?
So first year undergraduate studies, you mean?
Yes, like a bachelor degree.
Yeah, okay. First year, well, like most students, I was living with I left home, I went to live with my uncle, and then to do something called A-levels. In England, we call it A-levels, which is pre-university. And then I came back to London where my parents were and started university, living at home, going to university. Like anybody, you know, I was a little bit more mature in terms of my age, not in terms of my mental state. I was a bit older than the normal student. I was 20, I think, at the time. So a couple of years older than the normal student. So I was able to, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do psychology. And the reason why I chose psychology was because, as you can probably tell by my name, I'm an Arab. But as you could probably tell by my accent, I'm British. So I come from a kind of a dual background in the sense that I'm Arab by blood, but lived all my life in England. So that contradiction or that cultural conflict was always at the forefront of my mind. And I wanted to work out what was going on, how at home I was living under a set of rules and expectations, and outside I was having to conform to a completely different ethos. So that created a lot of confusion in me, and psychology for me was a way to try and work out what was going on. So I came into psychology not because of the money in it, because there isn't much money in it. It was because my intention was to understand what was going on for me and what was going on around me, to try and make sense of the whole kind of cultural overlap between the two cultures I was living in.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor. And I bet it's pretty hard to deal with that conflict culture, being an Arab and living like in such a foreign country. It is pretty hard to deal with. Thank you, Dr. Taregh. Doctors, please feel free if you want to talk about your experience. Dr. Anton, Dr. Ian, Mohammed Elhammoumi. Okay, Dr. Mohammed.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know how I get in psychology? I get in psychology when I was in high school. And we are involved in many group studies, clubs. And this idea flourished really in my mind. And they said, I go to the history to psychology. All the biggest schools of psychology get from this kind of clubs. I give you one, for example, everyone know Frankfurt School, a group of students, Adorno, Horkheimer, Benjamin Walzer, they are studying a book published at the time by Karl Koch, and start studying the book and start developing ideas. And finally, the school have invaded every academia around the world with their, what we call the critical theory, social critical theory developed by them. Students of wounds, the people, they don't know that, I think. Most of them, they go and they create their own flourishing within the club of psychology and move, such as Würzburg School, Berlin School, Leipzig School, and all this. Developed in Russia, the same, in Britain, everywhere. This is the germ, the seeds of psychology. Starts with the students, fresh mind, new ideas, and develop, understand everything, what is going in their own field. In my view, psychology, why psychology is very important. Psychology is the queen of all the sciences. And this idea is a chapter anyone study Friedrich Nietzsche. And he said, in the end, he has a prediction. That time we don't even know, we don't have wounds in his lab. Because psychology, I don't know why they call psychology, was created in 1879. Is a mistake. Psychology exists thousands and thousands of years. Why? And psychology, they don't know how to defend themselves. Psychology exists before the Greek, during the Greek civilization and so on. You know what happened? How you say medicine starts with Hippocrates. That time there is no instruments, no measurements. Why in psychology bringing these instruments created by Wundt and his friend to measure some reaction? And he said connect psychology to Leipzig and the lab of Wundt. So psychology exists before that. And the courses of psychology, they teach them in the 16th century, 14, 15, and all this is ignored. This is one. I will come to psychology because I'm interested in the individual. If we invest in the individual, we can change the society. We're creating the building blocks. In my view, this is what I will have a lecture, a conference next month in Brazil, talking about this issue. The individual is the higher form of the social. Abdullah is the higher form of Emirati society because all this knowledge, all these social relations, the web of this social relation is integrated through the processes of internalization and internalization to the mind, and they go up of the society, the higher form. Psychology was ignored because they say, oh, psychology study the individual. We want to study the macro, the society. But before studying the society, you must study the individual. And that's where the free developments of potentialities of individual is the condition of the free development of the potentiality of all. And that's what makes psychology now the dominant force, everything. We have psychology, from psychology of cloth to psychology of space. You have unlimited and everything, the shape human. Economy now, who shape economy? Is psychology, the consumer behavior of the individual. And psychology, you have opportunities to work in many things, and they equip you with the most powerful skills. And this idea again come back to Kant when he said, "I don't want to really to study the discovery of gravitation by Isaac Newton. I want to study Isaac Newton, the mental structure developed by in the brain of Isaac Newton to have discoveries." And psychology monopolized this. Psychology is the study of higher mental function, complex function, executive function, and so on. And you equip the students with the formal reflective thinking, critical thinking, intuition, decision making, and so on. All this form is developed within psychology.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the very specific definition. So let's keep on going with the other two doctors. Dr. Ian Gray, please feel free to unmute and.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Am I coming? Yeah.
Doctor,
okay.
Your voice is.
I was just thinking, I'm probably a bit. Yeah, it could be. I think the internet connection isn't very good. Hopefully it'll get better. It's better, yeah? Hang on, let me try one quick thing here. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly move this over to 4G. Sometimes that seems to work better. Okay, so let's give it a second. Hopefully I don't disappear. If I do disappear, I promise I will reappear.
Okay, Doctor, we can go to Dr. Anton, then we can get back to you. Is that okay? Okay, so Dr. Anton, yeah.
I was planning to talk the last out of the doctors, good doctors, because I probably have a somewhat different story to entertain you with. You proceed from the assumption that all of us chose psychology. I didn't. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a philologist, or as I say, a linguist, a specialist by training, by my origin, right? I started. So I never chose psychology. It's rather psychology chose me. That's how it happened. So I did my degree in languages, cultures, history of literature, foreign languages. This is a broader field where I studied than just linguistics. It was entirely historical, cultural, and again, verbal, like related to word. Yeah, I'm teaching psychology. Since then, I did my studies, masters, and it was also about education. It was a pedagogical university. Pedagogical means educational. Wow, as you realize, in this world, nothing works. In this social world, nothing works without interaction. Education is one of the forms. So if you are a teacher, that's what you do. You do psychology. You do not teach it, but you perform it. You observe your students, and as I keep telling my students, any interaction between the people, this is psychology. So, and then I did my PhD or whatever, some kind of psychology, and it again turned out cultural, historical psychology, quote unquote, as it is called. Furthermore, these days, again, I keep telling my students, art as psychology. We don't read psychological books. Even you students don't read psychological books. Yes, yes, we know that. But you go to the, yeah, but hold on. You're right, right.
This is probably a misconception. There's a little bit of misconception on that.
Okay, we'll talk about it. We'll meet in the library here.
I'll meet you in the library.
Building,
I'll meet you in the library.
And we'll continue this discussion there in the
Sure.
library of this great university.
Hopefully before I graduate.
Hopefully. We're not far from here. I'm in the H1 building. Anyways, but we go to the movies.
Of course, every weekend.
Right. It's drama. We observe the characters. We feel the characters. This is psychology, you know, condensed psychology. Art is one of the forms of psychology. Language. No, don't tell me language is not psychological. Don't tell me language does not influence how we think. It does. It limits, constrains, and allows us our thinking. Okay. And so on and so forth. So my kind of 2 cents to this presentation, discussion, think broader about psychology. There is big P psychology as textbooks, you know, scholarly discipline, and there is small p psychology. It's what we have inside of us. And this is what we are specialists naturally in. Since the very childhood, when we are infants, we can do nothing, but we can do nothing but manipulate our parents. The best psychologists in the world are infants and toddlers. Sorry for taking your time. I see you're getting anxious. Yes, right. I got the point. Speaking of psychology, right? You don't have to tell me, shut up. I see that.
It's kind of time consuming, and we have a specific time that we have like to go through.
It's what I am telling you, right? Thank you for your kind of mimic. Sorry for taking your time. Let's please
No problem, doctor.
Right.
We will meet one day in the library and we can chat about this.
Library, yeah. The duel.
Okay. Thank you, doctor. Okay, so to save time, let's go real quick with Dr. Ian Gray. Please feel free if you want to answer the question, and for the rest of the questions we can go through. So Dr. Ian, can you hear me?
Yes, Abdullah. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry, I have it working now. It wasn't working properly earlier.
Please, so tell us about how did you get into psychology, and how was your first step on going through this career? And yeah.
Okay. I never wanted to be a psychologist. I became one by accident.
Okay.
No, genuinely, I actually wanted to be an accountant.
Really?
So yeah, I won't go into the details of how that all came about, but when I went to university in my first year, we had to take 4 subjects, and I was stuck for a 4th subject. I took maths and computer science and economics, things that were related to accountancy, and I took psychology pretty much by accident. And then I discovered when I was doing it that I actually really enjoyed it. But your question was about how did I find my first year? Let me rephrase that question a little bit, in the sense of I found psychology confusing for a very long time. And I probably still actually do, because when you're an undergraduate, you have social psychology, you've got developmental psychology, you've got this kind, you've got that kind, you have loads of kinds. And it's very easy to get confused. Well, what does this have to do with this? And what I learned over the years was actually there isn't a psychology. There's actually multiple different types of things that we call probably psychology. So my area of interest eventually became clinical psychology. So I went off and I did a PhD in experimental psychology. I was still confused. I still didn't know what psychology really was. And then I went off and I did a PhD in clinical psychology when, okay, I'll figure, you know, because you have this divide always between academic psychologists and applied psychologists. So I figured I might figure out what psychology was if I did both. And actually, I think I have a better handle now on actually what both are. So yeah, that's been my journey. But I would have, anybody who's confused should actually probably realize that confusion is a normal stage. I think it's normal to be confused for a long time.
I mean, yeah, it is. Well, let me share this thought, as I felt pretty relatable to Dr. Ian, since he went to psychology by accident. That happened actually with me the same. At the beginning, I wanted to study medicine here at the university, and things didn't work out with me in medicine, and I got kicked out. Then I found myself, okay, I should go for psychology. It's the closest thing to medicine. Then on my first year, I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting. I should keep going. And now I find myself like a senior, and I'm like really enjoying it, and I'm going through it.
Yeah.
So
and I think some people are drawn to it. You know, the reason I love it is because it keeps asking questions. That's my reason for loving it, and I can ask lots of questions about lots of things. So yeah, don't feel bad that you ended up as a psychologist by chance. A lot of the best psychologists I have ever met are the ones actually who are confused.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Ian, I think you're the second who recognized this. When you are confused, that means you understand half of psychology.
Oh, less.
Half the wealth of psychology.
I'd say I'm about 10%.
No, you know what I mean? This idea, when students came in the 20th to Max Planck, at the time, the quantum mechanics and all this confusion between the general relativity theory, quantum mechanics, and this change. And when students came to Max Planck, said, I don't want to quit. I don't understand what is quantum mechanics and all this. I'm very confused. He replied to him, you are the only students I meet in my life who understand quantum mechanics. That means when you say I'm confused, that means you are holding the knowledge of 50%. You recognize the confusion that lead you, and that student turned the most powerful PhD students and scholars in quantum mechanics. Yes, psychology, what we know, the most powerful psychologists, such as Piaget, Vygotsky, and all this Brunner, what we know, less than, one time we asked the Piaget, he said, only thing I know in psychology, and you know the man he's creating a system, genetic epistemology is a system, grand theory. He said, I know only 1%. 1% of the wealth of psychological knowledge for the last 30 centuries. More we dig inside psychology, we know nothing. And this is knowledge. We are defeated by knowledge. What we know, we say only less than 1% of this accumulated wealth of psychological knowledge. And that's help us. When we recognize that, we progress.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, doctors, for sharing your experiences. So this question is for the doctors who had their PhDs or like they did their masters. So can you doctors tell us what kind of misconceptions you had while you were going through your psychology field? Just what kind of misconceptions you had, then you find out that, oh, this wasn't as I thought that it should be. We can start by Dr. Taregh Shabban. Doctor, you sound pretty quiet, so we're going to start by you.
Okay, so the question is, what misconceptions did I have about postgraduate studies?
Yes.
Okay. Gosh, I mean, my path, I mean, talking of confusion, I recognize that, what Ian was saying in terms of confusion, it's a real thing. I wanted to get into I knew I wanted to get into clinical psychology, but at the time, clinical psychology, it still is, was very, very competitive. So I thought that, and so you needed to have some experience in England. We're talking about England. So what you do is you go into kind of what we call support work with people in different setups, learning disabilities, people with mental health problems, and so on, and then work as an assistant psychologist for a couple of years, and then apply for your clinical training. I thought what I would do is, while I was working with people learning disabilities, while I was doing that, I thought I'd do a master's in psychoanalysis. And so I went and done that at Goldsmiths, University of London. While doing that, again, I discovered that actually it wasn't like clinical psychology as such that I was interested in. I was interested in understanding the goings on of the mind behind the scenes. And psychoanalysis was providing the answer for me, you see. So I went into that, and after finishing that, so the misconceptions I had, well, I think clinical psychology, I wasn't interested so much in the kind of the measurement part of psychology, and I never was good at that. I was more interested in understanding, like I say, the kind of the dynamics of what goes on underneath. So I went into psychoanalysis, and I liked it, I enjoyed it, and I thought it answered a lot of questions. Classic father-son conflict, me experiencing that, you know, dad from a pre-industrial North Africa, me in a postmodern Britain. There was that kind of massive cultural divide, and that was a real thing in my life, yeah? So from that, then I went into what they call a rehab hostel, which is people who have come out of hospital, who have had mental health problems and are now being readied for living on their own. So they kind of live in this halfway house. And it was a therapeutic community which no longer exists. But I was working dynamically with people like that. And it was a minefield, and it was really, really kind of mind-blowing for a young person to be working in that environment. After that, I went and I thought, okay, that's fine. I now think I've got a bit of a handle about what psychoanalysis does for people. And I didn't think it worked very well for people who had psychoses or more severe mental health problems.
Yeah.
Then in England, they had launched a massive new initiative to introduce what they called evidence-based psychology therapies or psychological therapies. And that was recruiting people for a first phase. And I was lucky enough to be chosen for the first phase of that pilot study. So I went and trained in cognitive behavior therapy and other evidence-based therapies. Then, so that was really interesting, but again, it taught me, I was lucky enough to train in Oxford, so I was around really people who really knew their stuff, and it taught me the value of the scientific basis of psychology, not forgetting, obviously, the qualitative aspect of psychology, which came from my psychoanalytic studies, because, you know, Jalaluddin Rumi says, once you turn flour into bread, you can't turn it back to flour again.
Yes.
So once you know something, you can't unknow it, you know? So that was interesting. I used that in my therapy, like my cognitive therapy. I used some of the transference stuff. But then I came to the UAE, and I came here as a teacher of psychotherapies, really. That's why I came, to teach people how to do psychotherapy. But I realized that you actually needed a PhD as well to kind of work at university. I didn't know that. In England, you could, if you were trained in something, you could teach at university. You didn't have to have a PhD as such. If you were training like a practical, what Ian called applied psychologist, you could train people in that field while at university. But here was slightly different, and it makes sense. So I started a PhD with a couple of professors in Oxford, and that was real eye-opening. The misconception about PhD is know your statistics, basically. I knew the theory behind the psychoanalytic field, and well, mine is more a CBT. I know the theory behind CBT, but the research methods, the statistics was really important that people need to get their heads around when you're doing a PhD, and that's what my learning was. I thought just because I knew the theory, I'd be all right. But actually, I found there's a massive gap in my statistics knowledge that I needed to fill, and that took a bit of time. And I'm still kind of working my way through that.
You know, doctor, this brings up like another question that some students in the psychology field, they find it that they're pretty committed that like there is no other thing other than clinical psychology that they have to go. So for me, like especially on the male side, we're like 15 students, and I think like 12 students, all of them, they're going for clinical. And I feel like I don't feel like I want to go to clinical. I don't think it's my thing. And do you think what are other fields that some students that they can go to? So for me, I was thinking I might go for an educational psychology, but I felt like this could not have a future or something. So what kind of fields that you think that some students, they can find it like a future job for them?
Okay, so I'll throw in my thing just quickly and then pass it on to Anton. It depends what your interests are and whether you want money or not. If you want money, then occupational, organizational psychology is the field. What they're sometimes called industrial psychology. That's where where the money is really. If you wanted to work with more challenging environments, and Ian Gray could talk more about forensic psychology. If you wanted to work in England, we have education psychology slightly different to here. So, but if you wanted to work with children and their learning needs, then educational psychology. So it all depends. I mean, psychology is a broad field or broad discipline, and it depends on obviously what tickles your fancy.
Yes.
I see Anton wanting to put his aura in, so I'll pass it on to him.
Oh, you seem like you answered this question, Dr. Farah.
Did I?
That's
no.
Exactly what I was going to say. Ask Dr. Ian about forensic psychology. That's it.
Dr. Mohammed Elhammoumi and Dr. Ian, I think Dr. Ian said he has a call to do. Dr. Mohammed, do you have any participation?
It's okay, I'm back. It's okay.
Oh, yes.
Don't worry.
Yes, Dr.
Yeah.
Ian. Do you have any participation that you want to share? Any ideas?
Yeah, I missed the last 2 or 3 minutes because I had to take a call, but I heard Dr. Anton there mention the word forensic and my ears popped up. So was there something you wanted to know about that specifically or what?
Sorry?
Was there something specifically you wanted to know about forensic psychology?
Yes. So if you can give us a more clear idea about what is forensic psychology, as we have some people that they're not studying psychology, so they might not have an idea about it.
Ooh, okay. It's a tricky, that's it. How do I do that really quickly? Well, for anybody who's interested, actually the seminar at 12:30 this morning is actually on forensic psychology. I teach the seminar class, and this morning actually we're talking about forensic psychology, and in the next class we're talking about the application of forensic psychology to Islamic law. You can't really, the funny thing is people actually, I worked as a forensic psychologist for a few years, and it was probably my favorite job ever. I loved working in prisons with people who were on trial. Maybe that says something about me, but hopefully it doesn't say too much. I just like the nature of the work. But what forensic psychology actually is strictly speaking, the word forensic means anything that is of use to a court. So you can have a forensic computer scientist, you can have a forensic psychologist. Basically what a forensic psychologist means is somebody who brings psychological information about something to a court. So basically it can cover anything, absolutely anything. But the most important thing to understand about forensic psychology is that it has to operate within a legal system. So when you read newspapers and you see things on TV like insanity or diminished responsibility, these are not psychological terms. These are actually legal terms. You will not find insanity anywhere in DSM-5 or any DSM. So what you're doing as a forensic psychologist is you're always operating primarily with legal concepts, and you're bringing psychology into the context of those legal terms. So if you want to be a forensic psychologist, you got to know a lot about psychology in general. You got to know an awful lot about clinical psychology specifically, but you also really need to know about legal terms. So like in the UAE, how is insanity defined? It's not defined by a psychologist. It's defined legally.
Yes, yes. But doctor, so how can you differentiate between the forensic psychology and other specializations such as clinical psychology, educational, and counseling? So how can you differentiate? Like, what's the big difference and aspect between them both?
Okay, so that's kind of a tough one to answer, actually. Normally, I would view them as the application of a particular body of knowledge to a particular problem. So if you're working as an educational psychologist, you need to know an awful lot about child development. For instance, if you're working as a forensic psychologist, you need to know an awful lot about legal concepts. You need to know an awful lot about abnormal psychology. And in particular, you need to know an awful lot about psychometrics. So the difference is kind of, you answered the question yourself. If you're an educational psychologist, you need to know a lot about that particular topic. And the same with forensic, the same with clinical. Clinical is different. Clinical is different in the sense of, and Dr. Taregh actually mentioned it. Taregh, or clinical psychology, actually provides you with a broad range of training. It doesn't really provide you with a specialist level of training. A lot of people make that's a misconception. You were talking about misconceptions earlier, that if you go off and you do a master's in clinical psychology or a doctorate in clinical psychology, all of a sudden you know what you're doing. Actually, you don't. Like if you take, even this morning when I was looking at the emails, somebody's going to be talking about borderline personality disorder. A regular clinical psychologist is not really going to know what to do with that. You actually have to go off and you have to do specialized training in things like dialectical behavior therapy. So the misconception is that when you become a clinical psychologist, all of a sudden you know everything. No, you don't. Absolutely not. If you want to go and work with a particular group, you often should ethically go and get some specialist training in that area.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. The biggest problem here in this discussion, we're talking about psychology as a given. You know, mental illness, psychology, mental rule-governed behavior of human being is grounded within the cultural context of that society. For example, Emirati society. Insanity here must be defined within the cultural context. We know that our mental functions or developed historically, structured socially, and grounded within the cultural context in which we live. Like here, psychology is not yet, it must be developed within the Arab culture, within the Emirati culture, not bringing these textbooks and these chapters in clinical psychology developed within like MMPI. Has nothing to do with Emirati culture, Emirati mental problems. Is developed the history to solve problem with these nuns in United States, in Minnesota. We didn't have theories. We are bringing this body of knowledge developed within the European culture to answer the problem of the European culture, but the problem of Emirati culture or society are completely different. That was psychology here. They are borrowing these names or borderline personality. What that means for the Emirati culture? We need like to develop a psychology grounded within the cultural, historical, social context of the Emirati society. And this psychology differs from one culture to another culture. Here we have a problem. I'm teaching this course about mental problems cross-culturally. And you know, here, why they don't bring al-junun? One of the madness is completely different in DSM or in in all these textbooks of psychology, is not creating psychology, but choosing the best books, the best theories, and borrowing them to a new culture. And even that, culture is operating, and psychology is operating now only of 5%. The dominant force of psychology is the United States. I'm from the United States, I know psychology, the dominant force. The other all bringing all this knowledge, this body of knowledge developed within American society. And psychology now, America represents 5% of the population of the world, 5. And within 5, there is another 5. The people, they don't know all our research, all our theories developed in psychology within the border or the walls of the schools and universities, because easy population. We never study people like in the street, in downtown, the population. We are taking just the educated schools, and from Heidegger to Festinger, from all the psychologists study this population. I went to go to study the Bedouin. I went to study the workers. I went to study the people who are representing 89% of the population. And this is what makes our theories is like some bugs. Flourished one and disappeared. We have millions of theories. Why disappeared? Because they can't resist to the test of time, can't answer. And that's what we need, psychology grounded within the culture. How you do the behavioral therapy, cognitive behavior, what to deal with Emirati culture is developed within the American mode of thinking, rationality, name it, functionalism, pragmatism, develop this to answer the questions. That's what they go there. In the end, the failure of psychotherapists, clinical psychology, psychology in general, they go and they are taking what? Drugs. That means going to drugs to overcome the failure of psychology. That's what we need really. And even a person grounded his mind with an Emirati culture as psychologist, he must understand the tradition, understand the implication of religion on the mind. Now we need this, like al-junoon, like jinn, like evil eye, and all these parts of the Emirati culture. These were the people. That's what who go now to the seeking help, not to the psychologist, to the traditional healers. And this must be addressed. Psychology developed within that context. I'm not ignoring. We need to understand the international psychology, the methods developed, the achievements, the evidence, the theories, but we must create our own, because psychology, one thing is involved in only one thing, is to create a new Emirati to meet the challenge of the Emirati society. And this really, that's the biggest contribution of psychology, to create a new human being, to meet the challenge of the changing of the society.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you so much. Okay. So for the next question, it's going to be a little bit more important and focused and oriented towards undergrad students after they finish their bachelor degree. So there's a lot of confusion for some students after they finish their bachelor degree, or like before they finish it, as during their internship. How can their internship affect their master degree, and what kind of advices would you advise some students they can take for their internship as to do their master degree? Yes, doctors, can anyone please feel free to raise your hand or like unmute and talk if you have any participant ideas and thoughts. Dr. Taregh, Mohammed. Dr. Taregh, I think we're going to start by you, okay?
You always throw me in the lions then first, don't you? All right. So what internships should they do before doing their postgraduate studies, right?
Yes.
So So at some point over the last few years, I was involved in organizing internships for the master's program. And one of the things I learned was that obviously psychology, mental health provision generally is a new thing in an emerging country like the UAE. They're doing amazing work, amazing stuff, but obviously it's pretty new. So the facilities out there that provide internships are limited in number, but also in terms of quality, they differ from one service to the next. So sometimes it's not so much a question of, you know, like I've got all these choices and I want to choose out of which ones I should go to out of these choices, because the choices are limited and the quality is even more limited. Obviously, if you wanted to go into clinical psychology, which is what from my experience, most internships provide, at least the ones I was involved with, you'd want to work in an environment where there was a clinical psychologist there, not a social worker or a counselor or anything like that. You want a clinical psychologist to kind of shadow them and start to get an idea of what kind of, what clients they see, what kind of tools, instruments they use, what kind of therapies they provide for what presentations and so on. From my experience, I worked closely with the Amal Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital here. And they have, Amal was taken over by the Maudsley Hospital, which is a British hospital and one of the oldest institutions in England, has a long history in providing training and also research. So they took over the management and the clinical provision at the Maudsley. So I was able to, I knew where they were coming from. So I kind of advised lots of students to go there. However, they obviously got inundated with people, and I think that the numbers are being limited now. Am I going into much detail here? Did you want more general?
No, it's actually really informative, and Dr. Saad actually told us before about Al-Amal Hospital, and she advised many students to go there. But as you said, it's being pretty limited these days. They don't take a lot of students, but like it's a good experience that if a student can go there and take their internship, actually.
Also Al-Jalila Hospital in Dubai, and I'm only talking about ones I've had experience with and I've kind of interacted with. They've got a bunch of fantastic child psychologists, child clinical psychologists, clinical psychologists who work with children. There's an Irish woman there, was my friend Ian, he's gone, who's great. And you know, when you meet people, you know what kind of sort of supervision they'll provide to students. So Al Jalila Hospital is also a good place to go if you had a chance to go there. So generally speaking, I think, to be honest, I think sometimes just going on YouTube and looking at bona fide sites to see what clinical psychologists do, because sometimes you go to a place and it's sold as a clinical psychology internship, but it's not really, and you might get the wrong idea. So I would, as well as sort of seeking a well-staffed department, also kind of go online and check out what clinical psychology actually is and what people do. And nowadays there's plenty of resources online to tell you about that sort of thing.
Okay, doctor, what about for those who like finished their postgraduate degree, like their master degree, whether if it was clinical counseling or educational, after they get their license, do they have mentors, or like do they have like a specific supervision for their therapy, or like they can do their therapy without a supervision?
Thanks a lot. And Ian kind of touched on this. Absolutely. So the way I was indoctrinated, if you like, at Oxford is that everybody needs a supervisor, no matter how good you are, no matter how experienced you are. As a clinician, every single person has to have a supervisor. So even if you're licensed, I know it's not a requirement by many of the licensing bodies here, but for your professional practice and ethically, you must have a supervisor with whom you obviously consult on difficult cases, but also consult in what we call in CBT process, which is your own feelings about what goes on in therapy. And in psychoanalysis, they call it counter-transference. That's really important. That's a really important part of working with people, so that you know which parts of the issues you're dealing with are yours and which parts are actually the clients. And kind of a third eye on that is always helpful. So yeah, absolutely. Supervision every stage of your career is important. I still get supervision from back home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much for the clearance.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Doctors, Dr. Anton, Ian, Mohammed, do you guys have any comments, any thoughts to share, please? Please feel free.
Sure. Actually, Taregh is absolutely spot on. He absolutely is. Like if you look at training programs in Ireland or England, which myself and Taregh are both familiar with, if you want to ever become a clinical psychologist, the critical thing for your internship is actually working alongside one, so that you actually see what they do, and you get experience in terms of application by observation. If you're going into a internship and it's run by a social worker, for instance, you're learning how social work operates. You're not learning how psychology operates. So the fundamental thing is actually working alongside a clinical psychologist and the supervision piece. If you don't get the supervision piece every week that addresses the skills and also the process parts like Taregh identified, I think your learning is going to be constrained. So that would be my thought on that.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Doctor. Yes, Dr. Mohammed, please.
Well, really, to go to the practice, we must really first understand what we are doing, which theoretical framework you're using. And theories is assumptions must be tested with the context, the cultural context. Now, the training, we need a retraining, but training within the cultural context. Like I give you one example. I use it many times, consulting colleagues in Arabo-Islamic culture. Suicide, I use the religion. It's forbidden to take your life. And this is really ingrained and crystallized in the Arab. I use it. Something, schizophrenia, you can use schizophrenia is completely different from, I have one student who did his PhD, I was shocked. All my life, I said, what is this? First time I learned from the patients, something still guiding their mental functions. And we discovering this, the schizophrenic patients didn't regress like the West. Why? Because they stay in contact with their families, with their friends. They don't really throw them in psychiatric hospital and they leave. They, at least twice a week, they visited them. We used our cultural heritage to our practices, theory and practice, to overcome, or we will be victims of the pharmaceutical companies, which dominates the whole field of psychology, of applied psychology in Emirates. And these are my students, they confessed to me, said, yes, that's what we're doing. And the virus is psychological, is not biological. This is my argument with my colleagues. Problem of divorce, problem of failure in life. The people lose really contact with their real world and end up with mental problems. The virus should not be, is not psychological, is not biological, is psychological. And this must be really dealt with in psychology, like social therapy. Nobody uses it. And this is really what give, because sometimes we're talking about these issues and we don't know the history of this. This movement of what we're talking now, it was flourished really in the 60s, right? Mid 50s and the 60s, right to the top. We're discussing some varieties of this mental illness is myth. What is mental illness? One person really revolted against this, you send him to these asylums or institutions. We never even discussed what is mental illness, how we qualify why you call that person is mentally ill, what we insane. We never question that. We're taking just the surface and applying these same theories and this, and going with the surface. We will not get to the contents beneath it. And nobody questions it, even psychologists. What is sane? We never question what is sane or insane. By the norms of the society, the cultural tools of evaluation of the society. And this is what psychology must be grounded, as I said, within the cultural, the historical, and the social context of that patients. Or we end up like clinical psychology, what they're doing in cognitive therapy, adjusting the patient to society, not a therapy of change, a therapy of adjustment, bringing the patient, he can't adjust to society, he has a problem, mental, imbalance and all this stuff. And you end up just tinkering. And in Arabic, I wish this concept, we can bring it to English. Tinkering, I don't like this concept because it's vague, it's not tarqiyah in Arabic. Tarqiyah. That's what you're doing now in psychotherapy and the applied psychology, tarqiyah. Never getting to the roots of the mental illness.
Exactly. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. Okay, following up to the next question. It's pretty tricky. This time, we're gonna start with Dr. Ian. How do you think psychology has evolved 10 years ago from now? And what do you think 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead, how it could be?
Actually, that's impossible to answer. And I'll tell you why. It's because nobody knows everything about psychology. Like if you take any particular, the only way to answer that is basically you get people who know their field really well and they can maybe anticipate the changes within that particular field. But at a general level, I wouldn't have a clue. I really wouldn't. I really don't. But if you look at contemporary psychology, the vast majority of it these days is neuroscience. Like all the big funding, all the big grant awarding agencies, the zeitgeist is neuroscience. Mm-hmm. I got my reservations about neuroscience. I don't think it's the solution or the answer to all the questions that we have to answer, but
how do you see psychology has evolved for the past 10 years from now?
How has it evolved in the last 10 years? It's the same answer, Abdullah. It depends on the area that you're in. Mm-hmm. Like if you look at the psychology of learning, when most students take that, they learn about classical conditioning, they learn about operant conditioning. But I bet you none of them learn about things like relational frame theory. Relational frame theory is the biggest development in learning psychology over the last 15 years. But most students actually don't know about it. So you always see this gap between what's kind of become very topical, and there's always a lag. So you see research developing faster than course development. There's always this big lag. You'd have to take it area by area, really.
Okay, interesting.
To answer it.
I added to Dr. Ian what happened. Up to these states, we moved four or five. The five I will add it. Research paradigms. Perception. What is human being? What we have in our academic experience and evolution and historical developments. We have Aristotelian man. We said here men and women, sorry. Aristotelian man. Cartesian man, Descartes. Structural man. Neuronal man, and now cultural man. Each of these five I identified in our developments of knowledge are structured within this 5, 4, and the last I will talk about it. Now we are living a neuronal man. We are nothing just by neurons in our brain and everything dealing with this. That's the dominant force and was taken by the pharmaceutical companies and because pharmaceuticals provide us with drugs. This is chemical imbalance in your brain. That's what leads you to these mental problems. The structural man before it, we are nothing but just structures. We are living in club of psychology structure, religious structure, historical structure, education, family structure, and so on. We are just moving from human being is nothing but this. And now we are moving to a new, I'm very happy to witness and defend it, the cultural man, in which now we introduce in psychology, no, again, still in the making, what you call like neuro-cultural clinical psychology. I introduced a course here and with my colleagues, what you call sensitive, cultural, clinical psychology, neuro-cultural psychology, and culture became now the dominant force in Emirati society now. How many cultures you have? I don't. Any culture is multicultural society represented in a very small country. How you deal with all these issues from this going together, interacting in peacefully way, benefiting from each other, and taking all the positive and add it to that trend to live together and to share their wealth of knowledge, potentialities, and so on. And this is, I think, what happened. That's what psychology now is stuck with this neuronal man. And please, if you have time, can you read one of, I like this professor who bring it what they call neuronal man. Is Jean-Pierre Changeux. And he talked about this issue. And now the dominance, everything is neurons. Everything is biology, everything. They reduce everything to this problem. And the psychology was taken by this surprise, this research paradigm.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, so moving on to the next question. We're kind of running out of time. Let's go for the important question for some bachelor students. What can a student do with only a bachelor degree, as if they graduated only for an undergrad? So what they can do with their bachelor degree? Dr. Taregh, you can start.
Okay. To be honest, I don't think I'm qualified really to answer that question within the Emirati context. Okay, because I don't really know enough about all the kind of work opportunities and the kind of personal specifications that different companies ask for. In England, if you have a psychology degree, there are a lot of what we call transferable skills. There's a lot of things you learn during a degree that are transferable to different domains of life. So psychology graduates are well sought after. In fact, well sought after, depends what field, but they are valued because of the fact that they have a unique, in England, most psychology degrees are BSc, Bachelor of Science. So you have a unique combination of studying, obviously, the sort of social science aspect of things, but also you have a good grounding in research methods and statistics, which again, in many fields that comes in really handy. So businesses, employ psychologists, the health service employs psychologists, social work councils, what we call councils, employ psychologists. So yeah, in England, it's good. It's a good degree to have. It's not a BA. And I know in our part of the world, the Arab world, a BA is kind of looked down upon, or arts and sciences are kind of, there's a difference in status. So the arts are like, lower level than sciences. Even within that kind of measurement criteria, in England, a psychology degree is a BSc, it's a scientific degree. So you're supposed to graduate as a scientist. And I know my good friend, Dr. Mohammed and I very good friends, and we disagree on lots of things in terms of the scientific approach of psychology. And that's always, if you want to come to see, C0065, you'll hear our discussions. But it is, so there's a focus on acquiring research methods, skills, statistics, which is, again, like I say, is useful in any career that requires the use of numbers, if you like. But also you have the kind of the social science aspects, which gives you a slightly softer, gentler edge than you would if you had a hardcore science degree. But here in the UAE, I know when I first came here, people were being employed in social services, in healthcare, but unfortunately people were they were put in situations that were not fair on them, in the sense that people only had degrees and they were asked to see patients or see clients. And that was kind of really difficult for a lot of people because they weren't prepared. They weren't equipped with the skills to be able to work with these people. I think now it's changed. So people can't work in hospitals and in social care services without a postgraduate degree. But sorry for the long answer. Basically, I don't know.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Mohammed, do you have an idea about it that you can share for bachelor degree students? I guess. Okay, for the next question, what is the importance of having mentor in our journey as whether if it was in our bachelor or in our postgraduate? If so, how would you recommend the students to have one? How you can encourage some other students to have a mentor? Because most students, they would be like, I'm qualified enough, I have the knowledge, I can do that. So how you can help some students to get their mentors? Dr. Mohammed, please, can you share some thoughts? Hello? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I think Dr. Mohammed Elhammoumi isn't here right now, so you can move on to the other doctors.
Okay, other doctors, please, any one of you can share their thoughts for mentors. Dr. Ian, please.
Okay, what do you mean by mentor, Abdullah? Are you talking about like a faculty member or what?
Yeah, like a faculty member who can be a mentor on some students.
Okay. I guess actually that fundamentally depends on the motivation of the student, because to be honest, I think a lot of academics they mentor readily and easily and quickly when they're approached. So you can't force a student to go and talk to somebody, really. So I'm kind of, I'm stuck. I'm just trying to.
Maybe if I can rephrase it a bit. So while studying and when you moved down to your master's and everything, did you have a mentor, someone to guide you? Did you have anyone that you looked up to that was dependable throughout your journey? And if so, can you tell us about it and tell us how we can go about finding a mentor and the importance of it in general?
It's critical. If you don't have a mentor, you're fumbling around in the dark. Like really. And you know, unless you like walking around at nighttime in the dark, which most people don't, you always need one. So when I was doing my PhD, I had a mentor. When I was doing my clinical training, I had multiple mentors. That's the way it works. You got, honestly, the easiest thing to do is find somebody in psychology who's interested in an area that you're interested in. If that's the only way it works. There's no point in having a mentor who does a different kind of psychology than you're interested in. So artificially forcing people together is a very bad idea. I think what students need to know is actually that academics and all of us are available for that. we welcome that. We love to see students who are interested and want to learn. So I don't think it's something that you can, it's critical. I don't think you can force it. And I actually think the responsibility a lot of the time for mentoring is actually with the student. Now that might be a unpalatable idea for people. Oh, look at the baby, look at the baby. That's a very young baby.
I'm a nanny for the moment, so just continue with your, I'm teaching her psychology.
She's only about a month or 6 weeks old. Even
about a month, yes. That's too accurate. What's up with that?
Yeah, no. Yeah. So there you go. That's my thought on that one. I think it's a student has to go looking for one.
Yes.
Really. But artificially forcing people together, very bad idea. Very bad. Like you got, your mentor has to be somebody that you look up to and you got to gravitate towards. It's like friends. You can't force people to be friends, you know?
Yeah.
You gotta be similar.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Okay.
Moving on to the next question. Sorry. Do you think it's better for us as students to do our master degrees in or outside the country? And if it's in or out, what kind of universities that would you recommend that we can get a better quality for education and a good degree?
Okay, is that still to me? Is that question still to me?
Sorry, Doctor?
Are you asking that question to me?
Yeah, please answer.
Yeah. I think Dr. Mohammed and I would give very different answers to this. Very different answers. Like I fully understand, like, and I've done actually lots of work on cross-cultural psychology. I've published multiple papers on it. So I fully recognize the importance of understanding culture within psychology. My worry is that if you take that idea to its extreme end, you end up thinking that psychology from other countries is irrelevant in different cultures. And if you take that argument to its ultimate end, that means you end up with the only type of psychology that's relevant is one that is, you know, what we call culturally grounded. And people are drawn to that because they go, oh yeah, my culture is different. My culture is totally different from yours, you know? But that's not to say that the laws of psychology don't, or the things that we know about psychology don't apply to different cultures. So my worry is if you take that argument too much, you go like, well, there's no point in me going abroad because they don't understand my culture. Memory is the same across people. Executive functioning is the same across people. The structure of your brain is largely the same across people. So culture doesn't negate a lot of basic psychological processes. Yes, you do need to do things differently in different cultures, but that doesn't negate all of psychology. So if you go to one extreme, you'll say, well, then, you know, I have to do psychology in the Emirates because that's the only place that's culturally relevant. But I think you're missing, I think that could lead to a potential problem. I think it could. Like, it's not unfair of me to say that, like, a lot of countries, psychology is far more developed in other countries than it is here. So in Ireland, we have forensic psychologists, child psychologists, school psychologists who are very highly trained and are very integrated into the system. They're not integrated very well into the system here because a lot of people don't actually understand really what psychology can potentially bring. So now you're caught in a bind. You're caught, like, I can only stay here because it's cultural, or I can go abroad and see what new things they're doing that maybe I can come back here and potentially adapt. That is the dilemma that's sort of being presented from my understanding of this conversation this morning. Like, Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much, Doctor, for the clearance.
Okay.
Dr. Taregh, maybe you would have a more better view since you have different culture and you studied outside the country and you came here inside the country and you saw it. Maybe you'd share some thoughts.
Specifically about cultural adaptation, you mean, or studying abroad and here?
Not studying abroad and here.
I couldn't agree with Ian more. I think there's a bit of a theme here going. Ian is spot on in terms of the opportunities that you get studying abroad. You may not be able to get in our part of the world, i.e. in the Arab world, simply because there's been a lot of investment in psychology, and psychology has been going on for a lot longer in the West than it has here. So if the techniques they developed to studying the human mind are more advanced, the knowledge that's come out of it is applicable across culturally with adaptations. So going abroad, you're going to benefit. I benefited from the opportunity to study with experts who spent all their lives learning about the human mind from people who themselves were experts and so on. You had like a chain of narration, as they call it in the traditional hadith sciences, sanad, to the early founders of the science. And that gave you a really good sense of at least how they do things. Now, absolutely culture is important. No two people would disagree with that. No two, self-respecting psychologists would say culture has no influence at all. Absolutely, it does. But I did a study myself, right? I came from a cross-cultural background. So I trained a bunch of Libyan psychologists, psychiatrists in cognitive behavior therapy. One of the trainees was a professor from this university. With a group of people from Oxford. We trained them, and then we followed on the training with supervision, or I supervised the clinicians. And then we did a study, pre-post, very simple design. Clients, when they first saw these guys before the training and then after the training, and see if there's any kind of differences in the recovery levels. Obviously, it's a very rudimentary, very basic kind of study, but we found, now, the only adaptation we did, right? So cognitive behavior therapy is a vastly misunderstood therapy. People think you only just touch the surface. You don't. With proper self-respecting CBT, you can go down to schematic level core beliefs, and you have to kind of work with those further down the treatment protocol. Anyway, so we train them in these techniques, and then we let them loose, if you like, on patients in Libya. So the therapist was Libyan, the patient was Libyan. And I was keen to make sure that if I was going to compare the outcomes, that the actual protocol was adhered to. So the same treatment protocol they adhered to as they did in England, right? The only difference, of course, was the actual therapist was somebody from the same culture. So the idioms they used, the language they used, the non-verbal cues were all appropriate for that culture. But the actual techniques, so what we call the common factor skills were culturally adapted, but the techniques were kept the same. And we found a surprising alliance. And like, for me, it was like shocking how we benchmarked it against the service in England, and the outcomes were exactly the same. Yeah, exactly the same in terms of patient outcomes, in terms of recovery rates. Obviously, not everybody recovered, but those who did, the percentage of those who recovered against those who didn't compared to England were exactly the same. So what I'm saying here is that the benefit of going abroad is that you get access to these latest technologies. But if you're wise enough and conscientious enough and caring enough for your own people and culture, when you come back here, then once you know how things are done in the West and your knowledge of your local culture, then you're able to adapt it in a way that's kind of suitable for your culture. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say, because there's a lot of useful things to get from the West. And I think studying abroad, if you get the opportunity, absolutely go for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. Hopping up to the next question, we don't have that much of time. As a clinical psychologist, for us as students, the knowledge we get from our undergrad, whether if it was in clinical or in such a field, what's the ethics behind using this knowledge and presenting it or using it with other family members or our friends as we are using it to help them through going throughout a phase that they've been through. Dr. Anton or Ian? Okay, Dr. Ian, please.
Okay, so the question is, if you're an undergraduate and you know a bit about psychology, can you come along and apply that to somebody in your family or extended network?
Yes, like what's the ethics behind that? Is it an ethical thing to do, or should we do it or not?
Well, one of the problems that actually you have here is actually there is no fully formulated code of ethics for psychologists. Like if you look at America, they have a very extensive ethical code. In Britain, same thing. In Ireland, same thing. In loads of other countries, same thing. Here we don't have one. So when you start talking about what's ethical, the first roadblock you run into is that actually, well, where is the code of ethics that we kind of all agree on? And that's a problem for practicing psychologists here. Like there is a medical code of ethics, but that's not the same as a psychology code of ethics. It really isn't. So that kind of particular little roadblock, I don't know how you get around, but in a general term, is it ethical? It depends on actually what you're going to do. If you recognize that somebody's having a difficulty and suggesting that they go and see somebody qualified, that to me would appear to be fine and ethical. But if you're saying to yourself, well, you know, I'm an undergraduate and I can do CBT with somebody in my family, I would view that as a bit more problematic, because one of the core things that cuts across all codes of ethics for psychologists is the issue of competency. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but an undergraduate degree in psychology does not make you competent as a therapist. It helps you identify a problem, but not necessarily to intervene with it. But you got a bit of a minefield. The minefield is, you know, first of all, where is the code of ethics? And that actually would put paid to a lot of these kind of issues if that actually did exist. There you go. That's my word.
Yes, I couldn't agree anymore. Actually, sometimes it's the friends and family hype where they come and they be like, "Oh, you're a psychologist. You should help me in that, or you should do this and that." Then it's this ego inside you goes off, and you'll be like, "Oh, I can help you in that. I can see some symptoms in you in that." But
yeah, exactly. And I've been there. Like I know that feeling. There was somebody in my family when I was an undergraduate who needed help, and I felt quite helpless. I really didn't know what to do. And when you have that feeling of powerlessness, you're always tempted to start jumping in.
Okay, Fatma Zaabi, she's asking a question in the direct message. She's asking, is it important for therapists to have their own therapist? And what are the importances of having a therapist as a psychologist?
Well, I will actually, Dr. Taregh has already answered that one, and he got it spot on.
Yeah, so
he got it absolutely spot on. There's two things in therapy. There's always help with a case, and like you mentioned, there is always process. In any form of therapy that anyone ever goes into, there's always process factors. What comes up for you, what is your stuff, and what is somebody else's? And if you're blind to that, you're not simply going to be a good therapist. So this whole idea that I'm a psychologist and I'm fine, I don't have any issues and I'm whatever, like, it's really dangerous if you don't do the process bit, and you can only do that with supervision. Until the day you die as a psychologist, you should be getting supervision.
Yes.
And if like that piece is critical. So if the Dr. Taregh wants to add to that, but he's spot on. Genuinely, he's absolutely spot on.
Absolutely. Okay, we're kind of coming to the end of this panel discussion. What I actually would like from you, doctors, would you have any advices, any words, learning, any like an advice for some failures, some students if they're failing, or like if they keep failing and failing, any words that you can give to them, an outstand or something? Dr. Ian, you can start since you were just talking.
Maybe like how can students stand out?
How can students stand out?
Yes, going into their masters and PhDs and working, what can they do to be different from others?
Tricky, very tricky, because after 30 years of being a psychology teacher and professor, the one thing that jumps out to me is you gotta have curiosity. And the definition of curiosity is interest leading to inquiry. So curiosity just isn't having an interest. Curiosity is I'm interested and I want to find out. So it's the students who display curiosity are typically the ones who will, I think, do best, particularly with things like mentoring and stuff. Does that make sense? And the thing is, you can't, I don't know if you can actually train curiosity. I don't know. I don't even know if it, my gut feeling is actually that curiosity is primarily a personality variable.
Yes, true.
Don't be shy. You know, like I've spent a long time in the Middle East, and one of the things I've noticed is that for some reason students are very shy and quiet, and a lot of the time find it difficult to engage or maybe participate. So maybe if people could kind of come out of their shell a little bit.
True, yeah. Dr. Taregh, do you have any comments? Well, is there anything we're leaving out here that needs to be addressed? Any suggestions? We came to the end of this panel discussion. Doctors, do you have any comments about anything that you want to add? Please feel free. Okay, I guess nothing. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Thank you for whoever attend. Thank you so much. Big thanks for the doctors who have shared their thoughts and everything. Yes, Dr. Taregh, do you want to say something?
No, just to say thank you. Thank you to Alhanouf, and thank you to you, Abdallah. Brilliant, well done. And I think this is an amazing initiative on your part.
Thank you so much. It's actually my first experience, and I'm
God bless you.
that.
Excellent job. You've done an excellent job. God bless you.
Thank you so much,
Doctor. And thank you for joining the session. I think this is a really, really important discussion for the students, because there has been a lot of confusion. I do feel like we confronted a lot of those confusions. So thank you so much for allowing this to happen.
Thank you guys so much for joining. So we came to the end of the panel discussion. If you have any questions, you can guys view us on Instagram. You guys have our emails. So that's it for the panel discussion. Thank you all so much for listening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And I think that's the end of the panel discussion. Dr. Anton, you never mentioned, you didn't talk much. Why is that? You're like quite sitting there, just focusing. You're being like a real psychologist, looking at others and, you know, deducing their minds.
That was a personal question, right?
Yeah.
I got a personal question. I'm giving an answer, right? I don't have it.
You know, good enough. We're going to take a short break up until 12:30, and then we're going to continue with our dear co-host, Wedad, and she's going to continue with the event as we go on.
Yes, so After the 15-minute break, we're gonna start the next talk, which is about borderline personality disorder. We're gonna be talking about what it is exactly, and then we're gonna be actually sharing a personal experience with the disorder and talking about what it's like to live with that disorder day to day. So stay tuned. You can leave and come back in 10 minutes if you want, or you can stay as well.